Hi, my name is Clara Vance. Thank you for being here with me. If you want to hear more true family drama stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and share this channel with people who, like you, want these stories brought into the light. Your support is the only reason voices like mine keep finding their way out of silence. Every subscription, every share is a reminder that these stories matter and that truth deserves an audience. Now listen carefully because this is how it began. They banned me from my sister's wedding. But Noah stood up and said, "She's my boss." Freeze frame. The music cuts off. A camera flash sharp as a blade slices through the silence. The image hangs there, the shocked faces my parents caught mid-smile, Ivy's bouquet trembling in her hand. Then the reel stutters reverses, pulling us backward like a film strip rewinding through a projector. Time collapses, dragging us to the start where everything looked perfectly ordinary. Rewind. The first time I understood what it meant to be excluded wasn't when the wedding invitations went out without my name. It was earlier in the quieter details, the family group chats where my messages vanished into blue ticks, the way my mother's silence hardened into permission, the way my father's voice swelled with pride only when it was about Ivy. I was the older one, the one who paid for my own education, who turned numbers into strategy, who lived in the sterile glow of balance sheets. But in their eyes, I was always too sharp, too cold, too much logic in a family addicted to spectacle. Ivy, on the other hand, glittered. She was the star, the daughter whose smile seemed rehearsed for billboards, who always had a story to tell at dinners that made people laugh or cry at the perfect cue. She didn't just walk into a room, she absorbed it the way velvet curtains swallow sound, and my parents adored her for it. She wasn't just their daughter. She was their performance, their prize. And me, I was the one holding the receipts, literal ones sometimes. The tax statements, no one else wanted to look at the financial reports tucked into manila folders, the careful arithmetic that didn't sparkle but kept us afloat. I was the evidence keeper, the one who knew that truth doesn't dazzle, it just sits there, steady waiting for the moment someone finally needs it. So when the announcement came, the big glossy wedding, Ivy deserved the event that would elevate the Vance family name in ways my father dreamed about. It wasn't surprising that I was erased. They didn't call it erasure, of course. They dressed it up as protecting the moment, as if my presence would contaminate the photos, as if my quiet logic might overshadow Ivy's starlight. The ban came not in words, but in actions. A replacement name typed neatly on the guest list where mine should have been. A chair I never received a place card for. A family dinner where everyone spoke in past tense as if I'd already been archived. And when I asked my mother gently why my name was missing, she gave me a silence so polished it gleamed like approval. And Noah? Well, Noah was supposed to be Ivy's triumph. My sister's fiancé, the man who'd finally lock in her status. What my parents didn't know was that Noah once worked for me. He sat across from me years ago as a nervous intern, fumbling with spreadsheets asking for guidance. I trained him, mentored him, showed him how to survive in the world of numbers and proof. He learned under me before he ever fell under Ivy's spell. But on the day of the wedding, none of them remembered that. None of them expected the moment when the polished script they wrote for themselves would unravel. Which brings us back to the freeze frame, the part where Noah rose to his feet. Voice steady, eyes locked not on Ivy, but on me. She's my boss. The words detonated in the hall, sharp enough to cut through laughter, strong enough to slice the family portrait in half. And as his voice echoed, I realized the truth I had been carrying all along wasn't just mine. It was already alive in other people waiting to be spoken, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind further to the moment where this story really begins, the first sign that silence had been weaponized and that I would need more than logic to survive what came next. The tape hisses. The reel jerks. We return to the beginning where Ivy's star was first hung in the family sky, and I was already learning what it meant to live in the shadows of proof. New York nights have a way of making solitude feel louder. The city hums outside my window cabs, honking at red lights, neon bleeding across slick pavement. Rain lashes against the glass, each drop a sharp percussion, reminding me I am alone. In the distance, the low wail of a siren threads through the storm, bending around the skyscrapers, like a cry swallowed whole. My apartment is quiet. Too quiet except for the rhythmic hiss of the radiator and the faint whir of my laptop. I live surrounded by evidence spreadsheets, archived emails, reports stacked neatly in folders like a barricade against the chaos of family. But on that night, the screen showed me something I could not quantify. It was Ivy's post. Her face shone under fairy lights, bouquet in hand, laughter tilted toward the lens as if she'd been born rehearsing it. The caption cut sharper than any blade, surrounded by everyone who matters. My sister had written those words as if they were a hymn, and the algorithm carried them into my apartment like an uninvited guest. Beneath the chorus assembled relatives with their hollow congratulations, friends from childhood resurfacing for a tagged cameo, colleagues lining up to worship her happiness. Names scrolled down the page like a roll call of the blessed, each tagged neatly in bold blue. Everyone who mattered. My name was nowhere. I read the caption again slower this time, as if a second pass might reveal a hidden clause, an invisible asterisk where I had been tucked away. But the absence was deliberate. It was not an oversight. It was design. My sister had constructed her story, and in it I was already deleted. No polite omission, no gentle forgetting, just absence, crisp and absolute, as if I had never existed. I hovered over the glowing edge of the screen cursor, blinking in the comment box like an accusation. I imagined typing something simple factual, "I'm still here," or perhaps something cutting, the kind of remark that burns quietly beneath a smile. Strange I don't remember the invitation. But I knew better. Families don't erase you once they erase you over and over until your silence starts to look like agreement. I closed the box, swallowed the words, and stared at the photo again. Ivy's gown shimmered like liquid under the lights. Behind her, the familiar walls of a banquet hall my father had spoken of with pride, a venue worthy of the Vance name, rose in soft golden arches. I recognized faces in the background. Cousins who once begged me to edit their college essays. An aunt who used to slip me folded bills when she thought no one was watching. Former classmates who had whispered genius when my math scores came back, now laughing into Ivy's lens as though their memory of me had been erased with the stroke of her caption. Surrounded by everyone who matters. The phrase clung to me like damp fabric refusing to peel away. I thought of my mother, her silence lacquered smooth, nodding along with the choice not to mention me. I thought of my father polishing his pride with every tag Ivy made, convinced this spectacle was the legacy he deserved. And I thought of Noah. In the photo, he stood beside Ivy, smile-practiced hand resting lightly on her back. To anyone else, he was the loyal fiancé, the perfect partner. But I knew him differently. I knew the way his voice once stammered across the conference table, the way his fingers trembled over a keyboard he hadn't yet mastered. I knew he had learned precision from me, not from the family who now claimed him as their own. The rain pressed harder against the glass, streaking the city in broken lines. I sat there, my apartment filled with the glow of Ivy's world, a world where I had been written out. The screen scrolled on comment after comment, piling up like bricks in a wall I was no longer allowed to climb. Congratulations from strangers, heart emojis from people I hadn't spoken to in years, and not one acknowledgement of the sister who had built her life on proof, the sister who had mentored the man she was about to marry. I shut the laptop, the sound sharp in the stillness, as if I had slammed a door no one else could hear. The city roared on outside, but inside the silence was absolute. That was the night I understood the invitation had never been lost. It had never existed. And once something is deliberately left blank, it becomes its own kind of evidence. The rain didn't stop that night. It slid down the window in restless sheets, blurring the Manhattan skyline until the Empire State looked like a mirage drowned in glass. I tried to busy myself rearranging the stack of folders on my desk, answering meaningless emails, refilling a coffee mug I had no intention of drinking, but the glow of Ivy's post kept pulsing behind my eyelids. Surrounded by everyone who matters, the words wouldn't leave. They clung like static, buzzing louder with every hour that passed. At some point, almost without thinking, I picked up my phone. My mother's number was still at the top of my favorites list, though favorite had begun to feel like a misnomer. I stared at it for a long while, thumb hovering as though pressing call would be an act of betrayal against myself. Then the silence of the apartment closed in around me and I tapped the screen. The dial tone rang once, twice, 3 times, a hollow metronome marking the beats of absence. I leaned against the window forehead, against the cool pane, watching headlights smear across the wet street below. By the 4th ring, a familiar knot had tightened in my throat. The 5th ring dragged on like a rope pulled too taut. Then the inevitable click, the metallic shuffle of her recorded voice smoothed over with politeness. "Hello, you've reached Helen Vance. Please leave a message." Voicemail. I didn't speak right away. The red light on the phone blinked patient and expectant, recording silence as though it were proof. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened glass eyes, tired mouth pressed thin. I opened it once, then closed it again as if words might spill out if I wasn't careful. What could I possibly say? Congratulations. The word felt brittle, false like wrapping paper hiding a bruise. I'm so happy for you. A lie too sharp to swallow. Or should I thank her instead? Thank you for forgetting me. Thank you for teaching me what absence feels like when it's polished to perfection. Thank you for reminding me that I was never meant to stand in your photographs. My hand shook slightly as I held the phone closer as though the device itself carried weight. I thought about starting with something neutral. Hi, it's me. I just wanted to check in. But that sounded like a stranger's voice, not a daughter's. I thought about rage. How dare you? But rage in my mother's world was always rewritten as proof of instability. She would tell the story later, smiling as she said Clara was always so emotional, always so dramatic. No anger was a weapon she would twist back against me, so I stayed in silence, listening to the low hum of the line, the muffled static of distance. My mother wasn't there to hear it, but I imagined her anyway, sitting in the kitchen I hadn't visited in months, the polished table reflecting light, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She would tilt her head, expression unreadable, while I scrambled for words. She would offer nothing in return, not even a sigh, just that flawless absence that had always spoken louder than any sentence. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear until the hard plastic dug into my skin. I don't know what to say, I whispered finally, though the words were swallowed instantly into the void. Do I say congratulations? Or do I say thank you for forgetting me? The voicemail beeped cold and mechanical, cutting me off. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen as if it might replay my hesitation back at me. Nothing. Just the reflection of my own face caught in the glow. I set the phone down on the desk beside the pile of neatly stacked reports. Numbers made sense. They always had. They obeyed rules, they left trails, they offered evidence that could not be denied. Families, however, were not spreadsheets. They rewrote history at will, deleting cells, renaming columns, leaving blanks where people once belonged. And tonight I had been reduced to a blank box, a voice swallowed by a machine, a daughter cut from the script. Outside, the rain continued to drum against the windows, steady and merciless. I sat in the silence it left behind, the voicemail still echoing in my ears, knowing that even unanswered calls become part of the record. Evidence once again of absence. The morning after the unanswered call, I woke to the dull buzz of my phone vibrating across the desk. The rain had finally broken, leaving the city washed in a gray sheen, everything slick and reflective. I scrolled through the notifications mechanically until one caught me, a FedEx delivery confirmation. My wedding gift for Ivy had been received. For a moment, I almost smiled. It was the kind of gift no one could twist a silver watch engraved on the back with the words, "Time is proof." It was practical, precise, elegant, the kind of object that carried both sentiment and logic. My name was supposed to be etched into it, not literally, but by the act of giving. Proof that I had not abandoned my role as a sister, no matter how they erased me from the pictures. Still something in me tugged. A suspicion, quiet but insistent. I dialed the boutique where I'd purchased it, listening to the hollow chime as the call connected. The manager's voice came through, cheerful, efficient. Vance order, yes, I remember. It was shipped out last week. She clicked her keyboard, each keystroke echoing like a gavel. Tracking confirms delivery yesterday morning. Signed for by household staff. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. And just to be sure, the gift card included with the package. Could you tell me what it said? There was a pause, the faint sound of pages turning, then her voice smooth and certain. The tag was simple. From Ivy. For a second, I thought I had misheard. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. Ivy. Yes, she said brightly. Handwritten. A neat little note tucked inside the box. Silence stretched between us. My stomach tightened, a cold stone dropping through me. I had placed that order myself. I had specified the engraving had given my credit card, had stood at the counter under the boutique's warm lights, and signed the receipt. And yet somehow the history had already been rewritten. My gift had arrived under my sister's name, as if generosity itself could be stolen, rebranded, placed in the glittering orbit of the star child. "Thank you," I said at last. Voice steady, clipped. Before she could ask more, I hung up. I pulled a notebook toward me, one of many I kept stacked on the shelf above my desk. On the first blank page, I wrote the date and time in block letters. Below it, Manager Caroline. 9:14 a.m. From Ivy. My pen pressed so hard into the paper that the indent showed through on the next page. This too was evidence. A small thing, perhaps, but small things accumulate. I opened the drawer where I stored receipts, warranties, account statements. Pages crisp and unbending, each one a shield against the family's shifting narrative. I slipped the note into a folder marked Wedding 2025. The manila edges were already starting to swell with paper. When history is rewritten, I whispered to the quiet room, "Keep the receipt." The phrase lodged itself in my chest like a mantra. It wasn't enough to see the truth. It had to be preserved. Because in my family, facts without documentation were dismissed as feelings, and feelings were the easiest thing to erase. Proof, however, had weight. Proof could outlast even silence. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the FedEx email still glowing on the screen. Confirmation timestamp signature. The watch was in their hands. Yes, but my name had been carved out, replaced cleanly by Ivy's flourish. They had turned my gift into her victory. In another family, it might have been a mistake, a clerical error, a mix-up at the store. But here I knew better. Erasure was never accidental. It was curated. My absence was not a gap, but a design. Outside the city had begun to stir. The honk of traffic, the bark of a street vendor, the scrape of a shovel clearing puddles from a stoop. Inside, I turned another page in my notebook, the paper crackling under my hand. The ledger of evidence was only just beginning, and I knew I would need every line, every timestamp, every name. The truth was already slipping, replaced by Ivy's glittering fiction. But I would not let it vanish completely. Not while I had the receipts. By the end of that week, the file arrived in my inbox. A forwarded attachment, nothing fancy, just a spreadsheet exported to PDF. The subject line was blank, as though the sender, one of those distant cousins who floats on the outer rim of family gatherings, wanted no fingerprints on the act. I opened it anyway. The glow of the laptop spilling across my desk. The rain outside replaced by the quiet static of a January wind. It was the RSVP list. I scrolled slowly, each line a neat arrangement of names, table numbers, entree choices. The Vances, the Ellis's colleagues, neighbors, even that one childhood friend of Ivy's whose biggest claim to fame had been fainting at a middle school talent show. Everyone had a place. Everyone had been accounted for. Everyone except me. I searched again, my eyes scanning the rows with the precision of someone trained to catch discrepancies in balance sheets. No Clara. No trace of me. It was as though the list had been scrubbed, my name dissolved before it even touched the page. But then there it was. A name that snagged like a thorn. Diana Vance's cousin. I blinked once, twice. There is no Diana Vance. There has never been a Diana Vance. Our family tree is tangled enough to hold secrets, but not that one. The letters sat on the page, brazen, fabricated, bold as daylight. Someone had conjured a person out of thin air and slotted her neatly into the chair that should have been mine. The realization came slowly, like ink spreading through water. I hadn't just been erased. I'd been replaced. My existence in that moment had been traded for a fiction, a character they could control. Diana was the kind of guest who wouldn't disturb the photographs, wouldn't interrupt Ivy's spotlight, wouldn't carry the weight of memory or evidence. Diana was convenient. Diana was silence personified. I leaned back in my chair, the heat of the laptop pressing against my thighs, and stared at the name until the letters blurred. The spreadsheet was more than a list. It was a ledger of values, a declaration of who mattered and who didn't. And in that carefully curated catalog, I was absent. My training kicked in. Evidence is nothing without record. I pulled my notebook closer, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote the details in thick, unyielding ink RSVP list. Forwarded 10:43 p.m. Sender withheld. File line 37, Diana Vance, cousin. The act of writing steadied me. Documentation transforms pain into proof. If they were rewriting history, then I would build an archive to counter it. Line by line, note by note, until their fiction collapsed under the weight of receipts. I saved the file to 3 separate folders labeled each with date and source, then uploaded a backup to the cloud. It was overkill maybe, but I had learned the hard way. Stories vanish quickly when there's no paper trail. Families are experts in erasure. They call it protecting dignity, preserving peace. But peace built on lies is fragile, and dignity stolen is not dignity at all. I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection ghosting across the black screen. For a moment, it looked like Diana herself was staring back, faceless, invented, occupying the space where I should have been. A cousin who never existed, but who now sat in my chair at my sister's wedding. The quiet of my apartment deepened, thick as fog. I thought about the guests clinking glasses under chandeliers, toasting Ivy and Noah, their voices echoing into the night. They would call it family, call it tradition, call it legacy. And I would sit here with the proof, a spreadsheet, a false name, an empty space where mine should be. I whispered to the dark as if it could carry my voice into the banquet hall. You can't replace me with a ghost. And to those listening now, to anyone who has ever been deleted from their own story, I want to ask you this. Have you ever had your name replaced by someone else's, erased and rewritten as though you didn't belong? Comment 1, if yes, 0, if no. Because sometimes the first step to reclaiming your voice is to admit it was taken. Silence doesn't come free. That's something I learned long before the wedding invitations, long before Ivy's caption or the phantom cousin on the RSVP list. Silence is expensive, and for years I was the one footing the bill. Flashback. I can still see my father's credit card statement numbers tumbling down the page like dominoes. He handed it to me without shame, the corners smudged from his fingers, the balance swollen with charges he pretended not to notice. A new suit for a gala rounds of drinks at clubs where his friends toasted the strength of the Vance name. I had just begun my first real job at the firm, and already the weight of his debt was in my hands. You're good with numbers, Clara. Just move it around. Make it disappear. I did. I paid the balance, erased the red, carried the silence. Then came Ivy's tuition. She was the golden child, too dazzling to be slowed by something so banal as money. Her acceptance letters arrived with ribbons, glossy brochures of ivy-covered halls, fanned across the dining room table like trophies. But trophies have price tags. She can't lose this opportunity, Clara. Think of the family's future. So I thought of it. I thought of the way my father's voice swelled with pride when he said Ivy's name, the way my mother's silence seemed to nod approval. I wired the payment. Semester after semester, I pressed confirm on bills that could have been mine graduate school applications, travel fellowships I never dared consider. Instead, I worked, I saved, I spent, and Ivy became the star. And the house. Always the house. Our family home on the edge of town, brick walls, crumbling roof leaking after every storm. My father refused to admit it. My mother refused to speak of it. But water stains creep and mold doesn't wait for dignity. So I wrote the checks. Contractors came and went, tiles replaced, gutters cleared. The leaks stopped, the house stood, and no one asked who kept it standing. Years of this layered quietly like sediment. I never complained, not out loud. Evidence stacks differently when it's money. You can't frame it on the wall, can't hold it up to the light at dinner. It vanishes into the marrow of family life, invisible until the day someone decides to pretend it never happened. And now, in the silence of my apartment, staring at the RSVP that excluded me, I understood the cruel symmetry. They had erased my name, deleted me from photos, invented a cousin to take my place. But they never erased my account numbers. They never deleted my routing code. They never refused the direct deposits that had carried them through years of convenience. I whispered it aloud, tasting the bitterness like iron. They erased me, but not my bank account. The words pulsed like a refrain, repeating themselves in my head as I traced back through the ledger of my own life. My signature on checks no one acknowledged. My savings drained into debts I didn't create. My credit stretched thin so Ivy's path could remain golden. Every family has its currency. In mine, it wasn't love or loyalty, it was silence financed and enforced. I paid so they could forget me. I paid so they could polish Ivy's story until it gleamed. I paid so they could call me dramatic, unstable, unnecessary while still cashing every check. Now, sitting at my desk, I opened the drawer where my notebooks lay. On the inside cover of the newest one, I wrote in thick, heavy ink, evidence number 2. Financial silence. Debt erased, tuition paid, house repaired. My name erased everywhere except the bills. The pen dug deep into the paper, leaving grooves sharp enough to cut skin. I closed the notebook, slowly slid it back into place, and let the mantra settle into me. They erased me, but not my bank account. It was the kind of proof no caption could overwrite, no RSVP could delete. It was there, permanent, unshakable. And one day when the silence broke, it would be the loudest receipt of all. It started with a message that landed in my inbox late at night. The sender was a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, one of those college acquaintances who drifts in and out of your orbit, resurfacing only when something unsettling compels them. The subject line was empty. The body contained just a single line: I thought you should know Ivy's been showing people your old email. For a moment, I stared at the screen, confused. Which email I've written, thousands, memos, strategy outlines, quiet notes to myself. But as my eyes moved down the message, my stomach tightened. The friend explained Ivy had been passing around an email I sent to my mother 6 years ago. She was using it as proof, telling relatives and friends. See, Clara's unstable. She's always been this way. I sat back in my chair, my pulse thrumming in my throat. Of all the weapons my sister could wield, she had chosen words I once wrote in exhaustion, not malice. I opened my archive fingers, suddenly stiff, and typed the search terms. It didn't take long. I've always kept everything. Evidence, even when I didn't know I'd need it, lives in the marrow of my habits. The email surfaced like a ghost from a different life. Subject: sorry for last night. I remembered it instantly. A late-night note written after a long week at the firm, back when I was young enough to believe I owed my family explanations for every crack in my composure. The body was short, almost timid. Mom, I'm sorry if I sounded harsh on the phone. Work has been overwhelming, and I didn't want to take it out on you. I'll be better next time. Love, Clara. That was all. No meltdown. No threats. No unraveling confession. Just a tired daughter apologizing for a raised voice after too many sleepless nights. And yet, in Ivy's retelling, this ordinary message had been sharpened into a dagger. She had lifted it out of its quiet context, waved it like a banner, and declared it proof of instability. Proof that I was volatile, fragile, unsafe to invite into the fragile theater of her wedding. I read the words again side by side, the original soft and apologetic, and the distorted version whispered through Ivy's mouth. Between the two lay the gap where truth collapses into narrative. Families are experts at this transformation. They don't invent lies from nothing. They repurpose small truths, bending them until kindness becomes confession. Fatigue becomes weakness. Apology becomes evidence. I whispered the words aloud to myself, almost as a reminder. This was goodwill. This was care. This was me trying to be better. The email on my screen glowed back innocent and unchanged, while the phantom Ivy brandished existed only in the minds of others. Friends, relatives, acquaintances who would never see the original, only her curated distortion. I pulled my notebook closer, the one already swelling with evidence. On a fresh page, I wrote email to Helen, 2019. Subject: sorry for last night. Tone: apologetic, respectful. Distorted as proof of instability by Ivy, circulated in 2025. Beneath it, I drew 2 columns. On the left, I transcribed the original text. On the right, I wrote Ivy's claim as I had heard it through the grapevine. Look how she admits she can't handle herself. She's always been unstable. Side by side, the contrast was brutal. Between goodwill and weaponization lay a canyon carved by intent. Mine was to soothe. Hers was to erase. The room was silent except for the scratch of my pen and the low hum of the radiator. Outside, New York pressed on, indifferent. But inside my apartment, I felt the old ache return, the ache of realizing that every word I wrote, every gesture I offered could be stolen and reforged into an indictment. Still, even in that ache, I felt something steadier beneath it, the quiet certainty that distortion can only last so long. Proof preserved has a way of resurfacing. And I was the one who kept the archives. I closed my notebook and whispered to the dark. They turned kindness into ammunition. But I know the difference. And someday, so will they. The night I decided, the apartment felt less like a home and more like an archive. Papers sprawled across the desk in layered strata. The RSVP file glowing on my laptop screen. The screenshot of Ivy's caption pinned to my desktop. The printed receipt from the boutique where I'd bought the engraved watch, the scanned copy of my father's credit card statement, the tuition invoices I had paid without question. Evidence everywhere, humming with a quiet insistence. Each page was a fragment of the story they tried to delete. I sat in the middle of it all, breathing slowly, the city's muted roar rising through the rain-slicked streets below. For a long time, I had carried their silence like a cloak, mistaking invisibility for safety. But safety was an illusion. They hadn't simply overlooked me, they had removed me with intent. That's the difference between being unseen and being erased. One is accident, the other is authorship. I spoke it aloud to the empty room, my voice startling in its firmness. I am not invisible. I was erased. The difference lies in who holds the pen. The words vibrated through me like a verdict. And I am taking the pen back. It felt like a mantra, a vow carved in stone. I repeated it slower, each syllable an incision against the narrative they built. I am not invisible. I was erased. The difference lies in who holds the pen. I am taking the pen back. With that, the task became almost mechanical. I reached for a new binder, black leather with metal clasps that snapped shut like a promise. On its first page, I slid the RSVP file, row 37, the phantom Diana Vance cousin, highlighted in red, a placeholder name that had stood where mine should have been. I labeled it Evidence Number 2, Substitution of Identity. Next came the email. I printed it, the original, sorry for last night, still gentle on the page. Beside it, I placed a typed transcript of Ivy's distortion, the whispers that branded me unstable. 2 versions side by side showing the fracture between truth and fiction. Evidence. Number 3, distortion of intent. I added the boutique receipt, crisp and white, bearing the charge for the engraved watch. Beneath it, I wrote an ink gift card misattributed from Ivy. A theft not of money but of authorship. Evidence number 1. Gift reassigned. Finally, the statements records of payments that had patched the holes my parents refused to acknowledge. Tuition deposits wired on time. Repairs for the leaking roof, for the cracked foundation. Credit card balances swallowed by my own account. Numbers don't lie. They simply sit there patient until someone tries to look away. Evidence. 4. Financial silence. One by one, the pages slid into their plastic sleeves, each entry cataloged, dated, labeled. The binder grew heavier in my lap, weighty with more than paper. It was the gravity of proof, the solidity of receipts, the undeniable spine of a story that refused to vanish. I paused, pen hovering above the next blank page, and wrote the mantra again in bold letters, I am not invisible. I was erased. The difference lies in who holds the pen. I am taking the pen back. I traced the words twice, pressing hard enough that the grooves bled through to the pages beneath. The sound of the ink scratching against paper was strangely soothing, like hammer on chisel, like stonework being carved. When I leaned back, exhaustion pressed into me, but beneath it ran something steadier than fatigue resolve. I had spent years financing their silence, absorbing their erasures, swallowing their distortions. No more. I had a portfolio now, a ledger not of debts, but of truths. Outside, the city's lights flickered in the wet night, 1,000 windows glowing with other people's stories. Inside, mine was finally being written not by my father's pride, not by my mother's silence, not by Ivy's performance. By me, with ink, with evidence. With a pen, I refused to surrender again. I closed the binder with a firm snap. The sound echoed through the apartment like a gavel. A judgment passed not on me, but on the ones who believed erasure was permanent. The record had begun, and I was its keeper. The plane cut through a sky heavy with clouds, the kind that looked like layers of stone pressing down on the world below. I watched the shifting gray until Lake Tahoe appeared beneath us, its surface dark and glassy, a mirror bruised by the coming storm. The descent rattled my chest, and when the wheels touched down, the jolt felt less like a rival and more like a verdict. The hotel sat on the edge of the lake, its white walls austere against the pines. From the outside, it looked immaculate, almost surgical. Inside, the air smelled faintly of chlorine and wood polish, clean but cold. The kind of place where weddings are staged like theater. Every surface polished, every flower imported, every silence rehearsed. I checked in with minimal words, carrying my single suitcase down the hall to a room where the walls seemed too pale, too empty. The window overlooked the water, and for a moment I stood there watching the lake's surface ripple under the wind. It reminded me of a document with its lines erased, smudges of ink still visible if you knew where to look. I set the suitcase down, opened my laptop on the desk, and began the ritual. Every file, every note, every screenshot, I backed them up again, uploading them to cloud storage encrypting folders, cross-referencing dates. The RSVP file with Diana Vance's cousin shining like a forged signature. The boutique receipt with the watch misattributed. The email to my mother, quiet and apologetic, twisted by Ivy into evidence of instability. The bank records, tuition payments, home repairs. My portfolio of erasure now compact and digital, ready to survive even if I did not. The glow of the screen painted the sterile walls in soft blue. I clicked through each file one after another, confirming they remained intact, uncorrupted, undeniable. It was almost comforting, the precision of it. Facts, unlike people, do not flinch. They sit still, awaiting the moment they are summoned. I closed the laptop and the silence returned. In the mirror above the dresser, I saw myself, shoulders drawn, tight face, pale under the fluorescent light. For a second, I barely recognized the reflection. Was this the same woman who had once believed in quiet dinners, family photographs, birthday cakes with uneven candles, that Clara had been erased long before the RSVP, long before the caption? What looked back at me now was something stripped down, sharpened by necessity. I'm not here to apologize, I whispered to my reflection. The words hung heavy, a declaration spoken more to myself than anyone else. My voice wavered, then steadied. I'm not here to beg for a seat at their table. I am here to exist, to prove that I was never a ghost. I am here to survive their silence. The mirror caught the glint in my eyes, a light I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't joy, not even anger. It was resolve, the kind that grows only after you've cataloged every attempt to erase you and found yourself still standing. I repeated the sentence again, louder each word, a nail driven into the coffin of their narrative. I am not here to apologize. I am here to exist. Beyond the window, the lake rolled in restless waves, dark and unbroken its surface, refusing to remain still. I thought of it as an omen. Families can freeze you out. Invent cousins to replace you. Twist your words into confessions, but truth, like water, resists containment. It leaks it, erodes it, finds a way back into the open. I sat on the bed binder at my side, laptop secured. Tomorrow would be harder, the glances, the whispers, the inevitable confrontation. But tonight, in this white-walled room overlooking a lake that refused silence, I had already drawn my line. For once, the story would not move forward without me. The reception hall buzzed like a hive, every corner alive with motion. Glasses clinked, heels tapped against marble, laughter rose and broke like surf against the chandeliers. I slipped along the edge of it, all binder tucked into my bag, my body angled toward the quieter corridors behind the stage. The air there was cooler, shadows stretching long across the walls where the public performance faltered and reality seeped through. That was where I saw him. Noah stood with his tie loosened, shoulders squared but tense, as though the celebration pressed heavier on him than it should have. His eyes flicked up when I stepped into the hall. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His expression shifted, surprise, then recognition, then something softer. "You're Clara," he said finally, the words more question than statement. Then firmer almost, with relief. "You're Clara Vance," I nodded. My throat felt tight, though I had rehearsed this encounter a dozen times in my head. The name sounded strange in his mouth, weighted with memory. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so it wouldn't carry through the walls. "I knew it was you. I remember the letter. The letter." His words unlocked a door in my memory I had long since closed. Years ago, Noah had sat across from me in a cramped office, nervous in a wrinkled shirt, fumbling through his internship application. He had talent, but no confidence numbers without polish. I had stayed late one night reviewing his draft red pen marking the margins. When the decision came, the firm needed a recommendation. I signed my name at the bottom of the letter. Flash cut. Email glowing on a screen, timestamped 2019. Subject line, internship approval. The words stamped clear at the bottom, approved by Clara Vance. Back in the present, Noah's voice was steady. You gave me my start. I wouldn't be here without that. His eyes flicked downward toward the bustle of the reception floor where Ivy's laughter carried faintly through the walls. But they never mention you. They made it sound like you didn't exist at all. I let the silence stretch my hand, tightening around the strap of my bag. For years, I had swallowed that silence lived inside. It allowed it to be defined as truth. But hearing Noah say it, hearing the fracture in his voice as he recognized the erasure, it stirred something steadier than anger. Validation, yes, but more than that, proof that the archives I kept weren't just paper. They lived in people too. I did exist, I said quietly. I still do. He met my eyes, and for the first time since stepping into this carefully staged world, I saw an ally, not a savior. Noah wasn't that knot with his ring still gleaming on Ivy's hand, but someone who had seen enough of the real ledger to know the balance didn't add up. They're not going to let you tell it, he warned, glancing back toward the ballroom. They've already written their version. I exhaled the mantra, rising again like a tide. Then I'll write mine louder. For a long moment, we stood there in the half-light, two voices caught between the performance outside and the truth inside. Then Noah straightened the mask of dutiful fiancé, sliding back into place, but not before he said low and certain, "Whatever they tell you, I remember." The words stayed with me as he walked back into the hall, shoulders squared for the next round of toasts and photographs. I watched him go, binder still heavy at my side, the memory of that old email burning in my mind. Approved by Clara Vance. Proof that once at least the record bore my name. And now perhaps it could again. The banquet hall glowed with chandeliers, their crystals trembling under the hum of voices and the scrape of silverware. At the far end of the room, a string quartet played something delicate, meant to be background, meant to keep everything smooth and seamless. But my pulse beat louder than their violins as I moved through the crowd, invisible yet unshakably present. I found him near the head table, his glass of wine held with that same posture I had memorized since childhood. Richard Vance, my father, proud curator of appearances. His suit was immaculate. His tie knotted so precisely it looked carved rather than tied. He looked like he belonged to the room in a way I never had, not because he was effortless, but because he forced the room to bend around him. He noticed me before I spoke. His jaw tightened, though his smile didn't falter for the guests who orbited him. He excused himself with a gracious nod, turned toward me, and for the first time in years, his voice landed like a gavel. Clara. Here to cause trouble again. The words were sharp, but not loud. They were honed for private use daggers dressed in velvet. He leaned closer, the smell of oak and tannins heavy on his breath, eyes narrowed as though my presence alone was an offense. I steadied my shoulders. The air between us throbbed with decades of silence, of debts repaid and whispers of truths smothered under the family crest. But this time I didn't shrink. My voice came out level, quiet, but steady enough to anchor itself against his. No, I said. I'm not here to cause anything. I'm here to exist. I don't need an invitation for that. His nostrils flared just slightly. It was the smallest fracture, but I saw it. For Richard, existence had always been something he curated, bestowed, approved. To stand there and declare my own presence was to disrupt the geometry of his authority. I slipped my hand into my bag and pulled out a plain white envelope, the edges already creased from my grip. Without flourish, without raising my voice, I pressed it into the pocket of his jacket. The gesture was so small the guests beside us would never notice, so swift it looked like nothing at all. But the weight of it settled immediately against his chest. Inside that envelope was not sentiment, not plea. It was record. Bank statements marked with my name, tuition payments transferred under my account receipts from the contractors who had repaired the roof of the house he paraded as a symbol of legacy. A photocopy of the boutique's order formed the engraving request written in my own handwriting, proving the watch was mine to give. Proof distilled into pages, quiet but undeniable. He looked down at me, confused for a moment, as if trying to calculate what I had just placed into his possession. I didn't explain. Explanations had never mattered to him. Facts did. Evidence did. You've spent years teaching everyone that silence is proof of obedience. I said softly. But silence is only proof when you erase the record. I've kept it. His lips parted not in argument, but in the faintest flicker of hesitation. The orchestra swelled behind us, drowning the air in polite sound. Guests laughed at some joke told across the room. Ivy's voice rang out high and gleaming. And there, in the quiet crevice between spectacle and truth, my father stood with an envelope pressing against his ribs, the ledger of everything he had tried to forget. I didn't wait for a response. I turned the echo of my words still hanging between us. For the first time in years, I walked away without the weight of his silence tethered to me. The proof was in his pocket now. Whether he opened it tonight or years from now, the truth had already moved closer to him than he wanted. And that was enough. The banquet had reached its crescendo. The chandeliers blazed with golden light strings of crystal scattering reflections across polished marble as if the very room wanted to applaud Ivy. The quartet in the corner played with precision, their bows slicing the air into neat harmonies. Waiters wove through the aisles trays heavy with champagne, and laughter bubbled everywhere, a performance of joy rehearsed 1,000 times in Ivy's orbit. She stood at the center, radiant, her gown cascading like liquid ivory smile sculpted for cameras that never stopped clicking. This was her stage, her coronation, and the crowd leaned in intoxicated by her gravity. Then Noah stood. At first, no one noticed. Chairs scraped gently, silverware chimed as guests shifted to look. Ivy glanced up, expecting the toast she had been waiting for all evening. The speech she had likely edited herself. The lines rehearsed until they gleamed like her jewelry. He raised the microphone and the sound system let out a faint thrum. Conversations tapered. Glasses were lowered. The quartet quieted on cue. All attention tilted toward him, the man meant to confirm the fairy tale. He cleared his throat, voice steady but resonant. I want to thank someone tonight. A pause. His eyes scanned the crowd. Not the head table, not Ivy, not Richard or Helen. Further, wider. Searching until his gaze landed at the edges where I stood half-hidden binder pressed to my side like armor. I need to thank Clara Vance. The words sliced the air clean. A silence fell so absolute it felt like the room itself stopped breathing. The quartet froze mid-bar, a violin bow hanging in awkward suspension. A waiter caught mid-pour, spilled champagne over a glass, the bubbles hissing too loudly. Dozens of heads turned at once, necks creaking like machinery searching for me. She was my boss. Noah continued, tone calm, deliberate. The one who gave me my start. I came into her office years ago, an intern with nothing but nerves and unfinished numbers. She believed in me. She wrote the letter that changed my life. Approved by Clara Vance. Flash cut. The email from years ago glows across my mind's eye. Time-stamped. Subject line, internship approval. At the bottom, the line written with certainty, approved by Clara Vance. When the memory faded, the silence of the room felt sharper than any applause could have been. The narrative Ivy had spun, the sister erased, the unstable shadow collapsed under the weight of a single sentence, amplified by a microphone. Noah hadn't raised his voice, but he hadn't needed to. Truth does not shout. It resonates. The cameras caught it instantly. A dozen phones tilted upward. The hired videographer swung his lens. The crowd's eyes darted between me and Ivy, searching for coherence in the contradiction. And then her smile faltered. Hard cut. Ivy's face on screen. The practiced curve of her lips stiffens, frozen. Her eyes betray her first disbelief, then panic, then rage flickering beneath the lacquered surface. A fraction of a second, but enough. The star cracked under the light she thought belonged only to her. The ripple spread. Guests whispered, covering mouths with napkins leaning into each other. One woman gasped too loudly. A cousin fumbled with his phone, pretending to check notifications, but secretly capturing the moment. Even the air felt different, like the oxygen had thinned, like the chandeliers suddenly burned too hot. At the head table, my father's hand clenched his wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. My mother kept her posture, immaculate lips drawn together into the silence she had mastered, but the stillness of her hands betrayed the tremor in her composure. And me, I didn't move. I didn't smile or step forward. I simply existed, unhidden, the weight of my binder, heavy but steady against my side. For once, I didn't need to speak. Proof was already alive in the room. It didn't matter that Ivy had tagged me out of her captions, replaced me with a phantom cousin, bent my words into confessions. The cameras had caught this moment, and once captured, it would never be erased. Noah lowered the microphone, his eyes flicking to mine for the briefest second before returning to his fiancée, his face unreadable. Ivy tried to recover lips curling back into a brittle grin, but the image of her frozen expression was already sealed in memory. Screens had recorded it. Guests had seen it. The silence of the room had testified against her. The quartet stumbled back into their song, a dissonant note breaking through before they steadied themselves. Laughter resumed brittle and forced guests desperate to glue the performance back together. But nothing sounded the same. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I was not invisible, not erased. My name had been spoken into the microphone, my presence stamped into the record of the night. The fracture was there, caught in light and lens, and no one not. Ivy, not Richard, not Helen, could pretend otherwise. And that was the beginning of the end. The room had barely recovered from Noah's words when the next rupture arrived. The quartet stumbled back into melody laughter, tried to mend itself, and Ivy's smile was plastered back into place like porcelain patched with glue. But beneath the performance, the silence still throbbed. Something had already shifted. That was the moment the waiter appeared. He was just a hotel employee, anonymous, in his crisp black vest, moving with the practiced invisibility of staff trained to be background. But in his hands was a plain envelope, white, unmarked, ordinary in appearance. He approached the head table with steady steps, weaving between clusters of guests too distracted to notice. Only a few eyes followed him, curious. The envelope was set down before Richard first angled discreetly toward his plate of untouched steak. My father's brows knitted as he picked it up, his fingers stiff around the seal. Beside him, my mother leaned in, whispering something low, her hand fluttering nervously at the pearls around her neck. Richard tore the flap open with the blunt impatience of a man used to controlling the story. From my place across the hall, I could see the faint tremor in his hand, the way his jaw set as he drew the papers free. A hard-cut image, sharp in my mind. Richard unfolding the first sheet, the black and white columns of numbers from the bank statement catching the light. My name printed at the top, the ledger of transfers beneath tuition payments, credit card balances, settled contractor invoices covered. Evidence he had spent years pretending did not exist. Another cut. Helen's hand rising instinctively to her mouth, eyes wide as she leaned over to glimpse the second page, the boutique receipt. The engraving order written in my handwriting. The charge signed with my account. Proof that the engraved watch paraded tonight as Ivy's perfect gesture had been stolen from me. The envelope had delivered what silence could not, receipts. I didn't move. I didn't need to. From across the room, I could feel the oxygen shift as their faces betrayed them. Richard's fingers tightened around the paper until it crumpled slightly, his mask of control cracking at the edges. Helen's eyes darted around the room, searching for escape, for explanation. Her hand still frozen against her lips as though the truth were too sharp to speak. Around them, the guests had begun to notice. Those nearest leaned in, craning to see. Cameras hungry for reaction swiveled from Ivy's frozen smile to her parents' unraveling expressions. The chatter that had tried to stitch the room back together faltered again, replaced by a low hum of confusion. Something unscripted had entered the play. It was the moment I had built toward quietly, night after night, file after file. Proof that my absence had not been the natural order, but the curated lie of a family addicted to its own performance. They could erase me from photographs, from RSVPs, from captions and speeches, but not from numbers, not from ink, not from receipts. The image will stay with me. Richard bent over the papers, his face stiff, the facade of dignity folding under columns of arithmetic. Helen's mouth half covered her silence, finally cracking into something rawer than complicity. They had always believed silence could protect them, but silence has no defense against evidence. The banquet still buzzed downstairs, a hive of fractured whispers and champagne foam, but I had already slipped out of its reach. My hotel room overlooked the black expanse of Lake Tahoe, the water restless under moonlight shadows rippling across its surface like bruises. I shut the door behind me and felt the muffled throb of the music fade into the walls. Alone again, I exhaled heavy and deliberate. The binder sat on the desk closed, but swollen its pages pressing against the cover like a body straining against bone. All the receipts, all the evidence, it was enough to prove what had been done to me. But proof alone does not change the current if the current is still fed by your own hand. I knew what waited for me. I had postponed it for years, telling myself it was just money. Just temporary. Just survival. But tonight, survival had to mean something different. I reached for my phone. The glow cut across the dim room, casting pale light across my knuckles. My banking app opened with the soft chime I had heard 1,000 times before, though tonight it sounded almost mocking. The screen blinked awake to reveal rows of numbers, neat transactions lined up like obedient soldiers. Each line carried history mortgage transfers to keep the family house from foreclosure, tuition checks that paved Ivy's Golden Road credit card balances, wiped clean for my father's endless displays of dignity. Even miscellaneous support, a vague line item that meant when silence had a price, I paid it. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. For years, these quiet transactions had been my invisible signature at the bottom of their story. They had cut me from photographs, invented cousins to sit in my place, twisted my apologies into proof of instability. But when it came to money, my name remained. It was always my account, my sacrifice underwriting their illusion. I scrolled to the first transfer. Mortgage support. My finger hovered above the word, cancel. The screen pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. I thought of the roof I had paid to patch the contractor's ladders, scraping against bricks while my father bragged about preserving the family estate. I tapped. The screen refreshed. Canceled. The next one, Ivy's tuition installment 3. A memory surfaced, her voice squealing over the phone when she got into graduate school. My parents cheering in the background, no one thinking to ask how the bills would be covered. I tapped again. Canceled. Then came house repairs. A dozen invoices for gutters, tiles, water damage. My name on every check, though I was never invited to walk through the doors I had paid to preserve. Tap. Canceled. With each confirmation, I felt the weight inside me shift. The phone buzzed, sending impersonal messages. Your transfer has been canceled. Your scheduled payment has been removed. Notifications like gravestones for debts I should never have carried. Finally, I reached the last one, a recurring transfer marked simply family support. No memo, no details, a blank vessel into which every sacrifice had been poured. For years, that blank space had been a mirror of me, an empty line sustaining them in silence. Tonight, it would end. I tapped into the memo field and typed words that burned as they appeared on the screen. Stop funding my own disappearance. Then I pressed cancel. The line vanished. The row went blank. For the first time in years, the account was mine alone. I set the phone down slowly as though placing a relic into its shrine. My chest rose and fell heavy with release. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was something more elemental, like oxygen returning to lungs after too long underwater. I hadn't just canceled payments. I had severed the leash they had tied around my existence. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. Wind scattered its surface, breaking the moon's reflection into shards. It looked fractured, but alive. That was how I felt, splintered, but no longer trapped in glass. For years, I thought silence kept the peace. I believed that as long as I kept paying, they would keep me tethered to the family, even if only invisibly. But silence didn't save me. It never had. It only bought me a ticket to vanish, to become the ghost in their photographs, the phantom cousin in their RSVPs. Tonight, I ended the contract. And now to those listening, I want to ask you this. Have you ever had to stop sacrificing for the very people who erased you from their story? Comment 1 if yes, 0 if no. Because sometimes survival doesn't mean shouting louder, it means cutting off the supply that feeds your own erasure. The air outside the banquet hall felt different, thinner somehow, as though the chandeliers had been weighing on my lungs all night, and I was finally breathing again. Behind me, laughter still sputtered, brittle and uncertain, clinging to the walls like smoke. The quartet played on, but their music no longer carried the same illusion of perfection. The story inside that room had fractured. I didn't need to witness the fallout. I didn't need to wait for my father's temper to rise, or my mother's silence to smooth over the cracks, or Ivy's smile to stiffen further under the cameras. That wasn't my role anymore. My role was to leave. I walked slowly down the corridor, my heels striking the marble with a rhythm that sounded almost ceremonial. Guests I passed glanced at me but said nothing, their whispers flaring in my wake. For years, their silence had been complicit, their laughter convenient. Tonight, they had seen enough. They could carry their rumors home like party favors. I had no need to explain myself. At the end of the hallway, the noise faded to a low throb behind me. The white walls of the hotel stretched blank and unadorned, sterile as a page waiting to be written. For once, that blankness didn't feel like erasure. It felt like possibility. The elevator waited its brass doors, reflecting a distorted version of me back at myself. My hair a little undone, my lipstick faintly smudged my face, pale but unshaken. I pressed the button and heard the quiet chime echo up the corridor. While I waited, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black notebook. Its cover was plain unmarked, its spine still stiff from being new. This one would not be filled with ledgers of debts or columns of tuition payments. This notebook was mine alone. I slid my boarding pass from my pocket, the slip of paper that had carried me here across the country, into the eye of the storm. The ink was smudged from travel, the edges softened, but it was proof of departure, of courage, of the decision to show up where I had been written out. With a piece of tape from the binder in my bag, I fixed it to the inside cover. A relic small but undeniable. Then with my pen, I wrote beneath it in strokes so heavy they bled into the next page. Clara Vance, I take back the pen. The words steadied me. They glowed on the page with the weight of a verdict. For years, the pen had been theirs, my father's, for rewriting history into legacy. My mother's for turning silence into approval. Ivy's for scripting every caption, every performance. They had written me out of their story so cleanly they almost convinced me I had never been there. But here I was, the pen at last in my hand. The elevator doors slid open with a soft sigh. I stepped inside binder under one-arm notebook pressed to my chest. The doors closed slowly, brass panels sliding together until the corridor disappeared. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint hum of the machinery and the room tone of the elevator steady and low carrying me down. The world of chandeliers and cameras was sealed above me. Silence settled, not erasure, but closure. As the numbers blinked downward, 10-9-8. I let the truth settle with me. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't wept. I had walked through the fire of their performance and carried my own name out intact. That was enough. When the doors opened into the lobby, the night air rushed in, cool and sharp, smelling faintly of pine from the lake. The black water rippled outside, restless but alive, refusing stillness. I stepped forward, notebook in hand, ready for the blank page ahead. And now to you who are listening, I want to leave you with one question. Have you ever had your name erased from your own family story? Comment 1 if yes, 0 if no. Let your answer be the mark of return, the proof that voices can't be buried forever. Because no matter how many times they try to write you out, the story is always yours to reclaim. And sometimes the only way to survive is to take back the pen.